Hello, folks. People are still joining, so I'm going to continue to let people in. And here's some more people. Thank you for being so on time today. And we'll continue. We have a good group today. We've got over 25 people joining and several people on some screens. So I think we'll end up having 30 to 40 people here. So a nice crowd for this special talk today. Welcome to all of you. I'm Laura Reckford, Executive Director of Falmouth Arts Center. Thank you for joining us for Falmouth Arts Center's book club for this special presentation today with Leah Penniman and her book Farming While Black, Soulfire Farms, Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land. A few housekeeping things before we begin. First, we are being recorded. There were several people who had signed up, but then couldn't make it. So they asked, could we record? So we are doing that for those people. And for those of you who have questions, if you could put those in the chat during the talk. If there's something urgent, we can deal with it at that time, but otherwise we'll probably wait for most of the questions to the end. Please keep yourselves on mute. That would be helpful during the talk. If I see that you're not on mute and it's disrupting, you might find yourself muted. So that came from me. You could blame me for that. And so I'm still letting people in here. So this is great that people are showing up. Just a quick thing about the Falmouth Arts Center's book club. It's free and open to all. Unlike most book clubs, we don't require that people have read the book in advance, and we've often gotten the authors of the books. So it's really a great introduction to the book, and often people go to the book after the meeting, and that is, of course, fine. We've had quite a variety of books over the past 2 years during the course of the book club. And so, as I said, the meetings are not necessarily on a certain day or a certain time, but over the past 2 years, we've had over 60 people attend one or more of our book club meetings. So if you attend a book club meeting, I will always include you and let you know when the next one is, so you can stay in the loop on that. And we have had, I believe, over 9 sessions over 2 years, and over 60 people attending one or more of those sessions. So it's been a good initiative, and we're really enjoying it. Today, we're in for a real treat. I'm so pleased to introduce Leah Penniman, the author of, again, Farming While Black, Soulfire Farms' Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land. And I'm just going to continue, let someone else in. There we go. Leah Penniman is a Black Creole farmer, mother, soil nerd, author, and food justice activist from Soulfire Farm in Grafton, New York. She co-founded Soulfire Farm in 2010 with the mission to end racism in the food system and reclaim the ancestral connection to land. As co-executive director and farm director, Leah is part of a team that facilitates powerful food sovereignty programs, including farmer training for Black and Brown people, a subsidized farm food distribution program for communities living under food apartheid, and domestic and international organizing towards equity in the food system. Leah has been farming since 1996, holds a master's in science education and a bachelor's in environmental science and international development from Clark University. She's a member of clergy in West African indigenous Orissa tradition. Leah trained at Many Hands Organic Farm in Farm School, Massachusetts, and internationally with farmers in Ghana, Haiti, and Mexico. She also served as a high school biology and environmental science teacher for 17 years. The work of Leah and Soulfire Farm has been recognized by the Soros Racial Justice Fellowship, Fulbright Program, Pritzker Environmental Genius Award, GRIST 50, James Beard Leadership Award, among others. her books, Farming While Black, Soul Fire Farm's Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land, and Black Earth Wisdom, Soulful Conversations with Black Environmentalists, are love songs for the land and her people. And without further ado, I introduce, here is Leah Penniman.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thanks everyone for having me. Shout out to Aunt Claudia for inviting me here, and cousin Natalie, and all of the family that have gathered, and the new friends who've gathered as well. It's really an honor to be here with each of you today, and I want to take you virtually to my farm, because I think the best way to talk about Farming While Black is to tell you the story of Soul Fire Farm. And while we can't, it's impractical at this moment to gather together and walk around the farm, thanks to technology, I'm able to share with you some images. So we're going to take a little tour of the farm together, and a journey through time and space. So hopefully you all can see that okay. And I'm going to start back in 2005 in Albany, New York. So my spouse, Jonah, and I were living in Albany, New York, having moved from Massachusetts. And our neighborhood was a neighborhood under food apartheid. And food apartheid is that system of segregation that makes your zip code the leading determiner of your life expectancy. It's that system of segregation that means that certain neighborhoods have farmers markets and Whole Foods, and other neighborhoods don't. You know, there's just a Kentucky Fried Chicken or McDonald's, a corner store. And so the south end of Albany was one of those neighborhoods that had previously been redlined, a predominantly Black neighborhood where there was not access to healthy, fresh food. And we had, at the time, our daughter Nashima was 2 years old. Our son Emmett was 2 weeks old. And we were very eager to be able to feed our family, fresh, healthy food, and ended up joining this farm CSA. CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. It's a subscription program. Join this farm CSA that was over 2 miles from our home and was very expensive, but that was the only way to get vegetables. Now, both of us at the time had over a decade of farming experience. And when our neighbors found out that we knew how to farm, they started to peer pressure us to create what they called a farm for the people. And we had that tickle in our mind always, as people who work the land do, one day maybe we'll have land. At the time, I was a public school teacher teaching high school biology and chemistry. My spouse was running a construction company. But that was the catalyst that we needed to try our hand at farming. And we ended up purchasing this land up in the mountains. We're in Grafton, New York, about 40 minutes away from Albany. Really hard scrabble land. When we first came up here, you couldn't put a shovel into the soil. It would clink because the topsoil was so eroded, and the subsoil was hard clay with lots of rocks. There was no septic, no electric, no well, no house, no plants planted. Everything was, literally the blood, sweat, and tears of our family and friends in those early years from 2006 to 2010, putting in the septic, putting in the well, building a house, a straw bale house, a timber frame house, using the stuff of the land, and building up the soil using practices that I'll tell you about shortly, so that we could farm. And the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture county agent, came out to the farm and took a soil sample and was like, you all don't qualify for any programs because your starting soil is the lowest ranked kind of soil that there could be, and you will not succeed at farming. But it was the land we could afford. This was the, $1,000 an acre land that we could afford as 20 somethings, and we went for it. And in 2010, the very first program that we opened was our Solidarity Shares. And our Solidarity Shares are the doorstep delivery, sliding scale, affordable program that allows people to be able to get fresh food at any price. And we started in the south end of Albany, serving our neighbors, and have since expanded that program. We serve about 200 people every week across the capital region. So Albany, Troy, Schenectady, Waterville, Rensselaer. And in the pandemic, we focused on the highest need communities who, couldn't pay anything at all for the food. So especially refugee communities, folks with an incarcerated loved one. So that program continues today. But, you know, we, even when we were running solidarity shares, farming was not cool in the 90s. Farming was not cool in the early 2000s. So we thought that would be that. And we'd just be out here alone on the land, growing food for people. And that would have been, a fine and satisfying life. But we didn't realize that we were really part of a sea change, a part of a time period where folks were realizing that, while there's a lot of trauma associated with lands in our communities. You think about a history of chattel slavery, of sharecropping, of tenant farming, of convict leasing, again, things that we can unpack over time in this conversation. As my friend Chris Bolden Newsom says, the land was the scene of the crime, right? The land was the scene of the crime. But we're part of a generation that is realizing, the land wasn't the criminal, though. And in leaving behind an agrarian lifestyle, a rural lifestyle, there's also a lot of culture that was left behind, a lot of opportunity for healing, opportunity for meaning and belonging left behind in those red clays of the South, in favor of the paved streets of the urban North on the sort of the train of the Great Migration. And we started getting phone calls. We started getting phone calls and people reaching out saying, can we come learn how to farm? We heard there's a farm that centers the needs of Black and brown communities. Can we come? And we wanted to heed the call. So pretty quickly into Soul Fire Farm's existence, we were starting youth programs. We have a week-long youth camp called the Liberation on Land Youth Immersion. We were working with young people who were system involved, and we got to deal with the Albany DA, where as an alternative to incarceration, young people go through a leadership program and do reconciliation with their communities. So we're doing a lot of youth work. We started having adults interested in farmer training. So we started a week-long immersion, kind of like a camp for adults, but a training, a seed to table training, a fellowship program, and an 18-month fellowship where our 10 best rising star farmers each year get paid, a salary and get a mentor and wraparound support. There's a cohort that spans from Florida up to Maine every year called the Braiding Seeds Fellowship. We were working internationally with we have a sister farm in Haiti, which is Aunt Claudia and my mom's paternal lineage. And so since the 2010 earthquake, every year we've been going down and working with our sister farm in Haiti. We also have a sister farm in Vieques. So the educational work started expanding. And you can see in these photographs, most of these are from our most popular program, which is the week-long immersion called FIRE, Farming in Relationship with Earth. But even on top of that, we had this challenge posed to us. One of our elders, actually in blessed memory, he recently passed away, Baba Curtis Muhammad, came through to one of the programs and was very grateful, to see us feeding the community and us training up farmers and making a space for youth. But he said, farms in the civil rights movement did a lot more than that. He said there would actually have been no civil rights movement without Black farmers, because if you imagine organizers going down for Freedom Summer, there was no way that they could eat at a local restaurant or stay in a hotel, right? Or gather in a convention center. They had to rely on the Black farming community to provide housing and food and meeting space. And these farmers even provided armed protection, for the organizers. They collateralized their lands to produce bail money to get organizers out of jail. So there quite literally would have been no civil rights movement without the bedrock role of the Black farmer. And so Baba Curtis was challenging us, what is it that Soul Fire Farm can do to make systems change, not just incremental change, but systems change. And that was a very important challenge for us. And we started to get more and more involved politically, not only providing space for activists to come and use the land. We had the New York State Prisoner Justice Coalition come and use the land, many other organized Black Lives Matter, other organizing groups, but to do a lot of organizing ourselves. So we joined several coalitions, the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, the Heal Food Alliance, and got to help write national legislation, the Justice for Black Farmers Act. We were one of 100 farms that pitched in to draft that legislation, and portions of that have been passed. It gets complicated because there's some lawsuits. But we also helped to form the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. We gave support to the Black Farmer Fund. So a lot of these institutions that work towards the rights of farmers and the rights of the earth and the rights to have access to land, we've been able to be part of. We are currently a team of 15 employees. About half of those employees work here physically on the farming. We were out there today planting blueberries, as well as running programs, and about half are remote. We have employees in several states around the country that are doing some of the policy organizing work, our fellowship, which spans 13 states. So we're very blessed to have a bigger team. And this became possible in part because in 2016, we went from a family farm to a community farm. And so we were a family farm, volunteering. I was paying out of pocket from my teacher's salary to run the farm. When we became a community farm, we created two entities. We created a 501c3 nonprofit to run the education program, and we formed a housing cooperative that owns the land, and the people who live on the land have a one member, one vote control. So I want to share with you, now that you have the sort of story of the arc of Soulfire Farm, a little bit about how the book Farming While Black came into play. And Toni Morrison in blessed memory said, if there is a book that needs to be written, that you need to read that hasn't been written, go and write it. And for me, there was a book that I needed to read as a young person. As I mentioned, I started farming 96, quite young. So I was a teenager farming in central Massachusetts, and it was a almost all white farming community. I would go to the conferences, and it would be white men who were put as experts or who had authored the books. And there was this one time I was at the the NOFA conference, Northeast Organic Farmers Association conference, and I went around and asked all the people of color that I could recognize if we could meet up for lunch, and shared my own quandaries, my own hesitations about being a farmer when there are so many other needs in Black and Brown communities that could be addressed. And was I in the right place? And fortunately, my mentor, Karen Washington, my current mentor, then she was a stranger to me, Karen Washington, encouraged me and all the other young folks in that room to keep on going. And she said that we have a proud agrarian tradition that is not just limited to slavery. And one day we'll have our books, we'll have our conferences, we'll have our place. She was right. She went on to create the National Black Farmers Conference. I went on to write one of the first Black farming books that was positive. There's plenty of requiems, but the first one that was positive. And so Farming While Black is a book that braids together three strands. The first strand is the story of Soulfire, which is the one that I just told you. The second strand is the positive and noble Black agrarian history. So for many Americans, all we're taught about the relationship between Black people and land is about cotton picking. But the reality is that there are many thousands of years of noble, dignified, genius contributions to agriculture that come out of the Black community, both on the continent of Africa and in the diaspora. So I know we're not necessarily a community of, we're not necessarily a community of farmers here, but there are so many techniques that organic farmers use that are very popular. Things like raised beds, right? Raised beds come from the Ovambo people of Namibia. We use things like compost. Compost, as we know it, was created, first in Egypt by farmers under Cleopatra, but later the women of Ghana and Liberia created the most potent kind of compost called African dark earth, right? We do transplanting in order to give our seeds a head start over the weeds. That was created by the rice farmers in Senegambia. Our use of cover crops was popularized by Dr. George Washington Carver, a Black farmer out of Tuskegee University in the late 1800s, and arguably the founder of the modern organic movement. He was considered by Albert Einstein one of the 10 greatest minds in the history of humanity. Our co-ops, we can thank Fannie Lou Hamer for our co-op structure. Our land trusts that we use, we can thank Charles and Shirley Sherrod and the New Communities movement for creating the first ever land trust, and on and on and on and on and on. In fact, every single technology popular in organic farming has some roots in African wisdom. So the book tells about that untold history, and that's been so important because up until that point, Europeans were getting all the credit for indigenous people's work, including Afro-Indigenous work. And then the third strand in the braid of Farming While Black is the how to farm part. It's a very practical book. So it's, how to space your carrots, how to can your tomatoes, how to trellis your raspberries, how to build your greenhouse, how to run a youth program like we do, how to dismantle racism in the food system. It's like a packed, tight manual. And I'm so grateful to my publishers for giving me a good amount of latitude with word count, which I did not have the privilege of that with Black Earth Wisdom, my later book. But Farming While Black is one of those books that you can pull off your shelf, time and again in order to see how to garden or how to farm. And one of the greatest honors is when I'm doing a book signing or a book talk and someone comes with their worn and tattered copy of Farming While Black with like mud in the creases and water stains, because then I know it's being used as it was intended, which is really to support people in farming. And it's wonderful to be talking to you about this book 5 years out. More recently, I published Black Earth Wisdom, which is a series of conversations. It's a collage of conversations and poems and essays about ecological thought in the Black community. But to be 5 years out from Farming While Black and have some perspective on it, it's been really beautiful to see its impact in university communities, in farming communities, and also in food justice communities. We're in a kind of tough spot in our food system, and the pandemic laid it bare. The pandemic really helped us all to see those cracks in the industrial food system, and the fact that grocery stores shelves would go bare, the fact that people who are already vulnerable would be even more susceptible to hunger. And these are things that those of us close to the food system, we've known for a long time, but it awakened the public, to the fact that we do live under food apartheid, where if you're Black or brown, you're much more likely to go hungry, but also to struggle with diabetes, with heart disease, with kidney failure, and other diet-related illnesses, not because of choosing those things, but because of lack of access, right? We have a food system where the people who grow our food, the farm workers who we saw, disproportionately impacted by heat and COVID and all of that, they're 85% people of color, yet only own about 2% of the farms and are not protected under the same labor laws as other Americans. They don't have a right to a day off in 7. They don't have a right to collective bargaining or unionizing. There's very weak child labor protections, a lot of exploitation of farm workers, again, who are predominantly Black and brown community. And then the land itself, 98% of the farmland in this country is owned by one racial group. And I'll let you guess which racial group that is. And so there's a very little land actually available for people of color in this country. And, it's beyond the scope of the talk to get into the whole history of why that is. I'm happy to go into it in the Q&A if folks want to learn more. But Farming While Black ends with a chapter that is about how to uproot racism in the food system. How do we act as allies and accomplices in order to make a food system that is fair, where everyone has access to food, where the workers are dignified and have their rights, and where the land is shared. And it's been beautiful to see that things have been changing in a positive direction in the past 5 years, and that Farming While Black was part of that conversation.
The last coal still aglow.
So I'll want to show you, before we get to the Q&A part, I just want to take 5 more minutes to show you some beautiful artwork that is connected to, one second, that is connected to the book, because I know you all are an arts community. And while I do think in many ways farming is art, and there's a lot of creativity that goes into farming, my womb and soul sister, Naima, is like an actual artist and created art for both of my books. So here, let me show you these and talk through these briefly. All right, so hopefully you can see this one. Okay, so this first painting, here we go. Whoops. All right, I'll pause there. Okay, so this first painting that I want to talk to you about is called Foresight. So Naima Penniman, who is the education director at Soulfire Farm and also an incredible visual and performing artist, created this painting, which is on the inside cover of Farming While Black. There's a whole kind of dramatic story of why it's not on the front cover. But it depicts the historical event of our ancestral grandmothers in the Dahomey region of West Africa, braiding seeds into their hair before being forced into the bowels of transatlantic slave ships. They believed against odds in a future on soil, and they believed that we, their descendants, would exist to inherit the seed. So they took their millet, their sorghum, their cowpea, which is pictured here, or black-eyed pea, their rice, a goosey melon, and braided it into their locks. They stashed it away. They hid it away from the enslavers, and then planted these seeds in their small allotment gardens on the plantation, keeping these seeds alive. And this represents an inaugural act of hope in the face of great adversity, and an inspiration for all of us in current generations and future generations to not give up in the face of difficulty, and to pass both the physical seed down to our children, and as well as the seeds of ecological knowledge, the seeds of justice, the seeds of community care. And we have a family member, Bonetta Adib, who's a cousin, also on my mom's side, who does this quite literally. She actually founded the Ujamaa Seed Collective, which is a national project of farmers who are keeping alive African heirloom seeds and distributing them. And so we grow a few things for her catalog, as do many hundreds of other farmers all around the nation grow for that catalog to keep these seeds going. And while this talk is not directly about Black Earth wisdom, I also want to share one of Naima's more recent paintings. This one is called Listening to the Earth. And something I love, there's so much to love about this painting. You can see here depicted this woman who, with her ear in the ground, literally listening to the earth. But those roots below, those are actual roots. So Naima went into the forest and dug up some plants and washed the roots, and then, epoxied them onto the canvas and painted over them. So it's beautiful textured painting. And the theme of Black Earth Wisdom is about earth listening to the earth, and comes in part from a powerful anecdote about Dr. George Washington Carver, who I mentioned briefly earlier. Dr. Carver was an agronomist, a soil scientist at Tuskegee University in the 1800s, and the father of organics. But when he was asked where he got his ideas for his many thousands of inventions and novel experiments, he said that he went into the forest in the pre-dawn hours, and under the dark of night would listen to the voice of God through the trees. He's quoted as saying, "Nature is God's unlimited broadcasting system through which he speaks to me every minute, every hour, every day, if I just tune into the right channel." So this practice of spirituality and science, of listening to the divine in nature, turns out to be a common practice amongst Black ecological thinkers. So I interviewed 40 ecologists, including Alice Walker. I got to speak with Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, Rue Mapp, T. Morgan Dixon, Joshua Bennett, Drew Lanham, Lorette Savoy, many of our most notable Black environmentalists of the day. And one thing that they had in common was having some practice of listening, of reading the earth, whether they were reading bird song or tree rings, the pH of the ocean, ice cores, the whisper of the wind. They had a practice of tuning into the messages of the earth. And we were successful that this painting actually did become the cover of Black Earth Wisdom, which just came out this year, Soulful Conversations with Black Environmentalists. So I will pause there because I know you all are an interactive group, and so I want to have some time for questions and conversation and reflection. So I'll turn it over. I don't know, Laura, if you want to moderate it or if I should just have people write in the chat and read it off, however you want to do it. It's great.
Yes, so thank you so much, Leah. That was amazing. And I'm sure people do have a lot of questions. So go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and Leah will see those, and I'll see those, and we'll get them to Leah. So now is the time for your questions and to get those out there. So
If they want to come off mute, is that okay? If
they
wanna-
can come
Okay.
off mute, and some, we use the chat just so people don't talk over each other, but however
Great.
you want to ask your question, if you're more comfortable just yelling it out, that's okay. That's all right.
Okay, I'm just going
Claudia.
to yell it out if I may.
There's
Thank you so
Claudia.
much, Niece, for coming. This was just fabulous. You are beautiful and wonderful, and I love listening to you. Loved your book too.
Oh, thank you so much, Claudia, for your kind words and for inviting me into this intimate group. I love book clubs. I was like, yes.
Hi, this is Robin. I did not read your book. I will read. I've been so busy, but right now, all I can feel is a sense of awe. There's so much here. There's spirituality, there's science, there's socialism of helping people, there's African-American history. There's so much here and the beauty of what you're doing relationship-wise with people. I'm just sitting here going, whoa. And people tell me I do a lot. All of a sudden I felt like, what am I doing? And it's just beautiful. And I just want to say this also, my mother is the person who introduced me first to George Washington Carver. And one of the mantras that she always said to me, when white men asked him at DuPont, how did you, little black man, come to know so much? My mother's words to me were that he said, when you stay close to God, he reveals things to you. And that has stayed with me all my life. And just listening to everything you said was just wonderful. And I'm just gonna leave it for other people to say. I don't really have questions. I'm too in a state of awe of everything that was happening to ask a question. But I cheer you. I think you're beautiful, spiritually, inside, outside, and brilliant. Okay, that's it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robin. And I'll ask a question while other people are thinking of their questions. So
Barbara
you're
had a hand up too, and Therese.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead with mine. Your property that you've been showing us all the pictures of, it's so beautiful. And you know that they said, oh, you can't farm here. Obviously you did. How did you get there? Just bringing in a lot of soil and obviously working the soil and so forth?
Oh yeah, so that's a great question. So the practices that I was mentioning that come from the mother continent and the diaspora are the ones we use to heal the soil. So it is very much about organic matter. I will tell you this kind of alarming statistic that I uncovered for Farming While Black, which is that within one generation of white settlers farming in the United States, they destroyed 50% of the organic matter in the soil. So the carbon, which, you know, is the bedrock of the organic matter, belongs in the soil. It's the source of the life in the soil ecosystem. But when you do a lot of tilling the soil, it burns up essentially the CO2. It oxidizes the carbon into CO2 and it goes into the atmosphere, which was the beginning of anthropogenic climate change, even before fossil fuel use. So all that to say, the way to heal soil is to put carbon back in the soil. And we do that in a few ways. One is no-till. So rather than digging up the soil, we use tarps and other things to smother weeds, then take the tarps off and we add compost that we make. We rotate our animals. We have goats and chickens, so we rotate the animals through. We plant cover crops. We add mulch in the form of wood chips or straw. And over time, you know, build the soil up. So I will tell you, we had this very, very powerful moment last year when Tiffany Lachey came to our farm to teach a soil workshop, and she's a Black soil scientist. And she took a soil core, which is like a cylinder that you dig out, and then, you know, you go pretty deep and you have a whole cylinder that tells the history of your soil. And she's brilliant. So she was reading, she's like, this is 2,000 years ago when the Mohican Nation was using fire to manage the forest. This is the 1800s when there was the sheep craze and there was 1 million sheep in upstate New York for wool. And so she's going through history like this. And then she goes, and this top 1 foot, this black soil, this black humus, that's what you all built in your 15 years here. And she said, this will leave a line in the geological record forever that you were here and that you contributed. And I was so moved by that because we think on these short time scales, usually as humans, maybe quarterly returns for your profits and this, that, maybe up to the next election. But to think about what are we leaving behind in the geological record is a whole other way to think about our contribution. And I was very, very moved by that. So I have new life goals. Like anywhere where we are, I want there to be something good in the geological record, not just plastic and death.
That's an amazing story. Thank you so much. So we do have some people had hands raised, and in the chat, Andre Price has a question. Andre, do you want to do your question, and then we can do the people with hands raised?
Sure. Thank you so much, Leah, for showing up and blessing our community. I have your book. I love it. I'm a scientist, but I'm a farmer at heart. So I work with an organization that teaches social justice through agriculture here in Falmouth. So I kind of have 2 questions, I guess. My first question is, do you have any tips on getting the social justice aspect across to a group of students who may be encountering these subjects for the first time ever? And my second question is, how late is too late to like go back to my own familial lands and change careers and start farming?
Never too late. I know some elders who in their retirement switch over to farming. So never too late. And especially if you have family land, it's so important to save our family land because it is slipping out of the community pretty dramatically. And yeah. So how old are the young people that you're working with that you want to do social justice with?
They're in high school.
Oh, great. I mean, if you want to email me after, I'll send you our whole curriculum. It's love@soulfirefarm.org, but there's a lot of activities you can certainly do with them to get them excited about these social issues. And social issues are broad, but I'll tell you one example, one of the popular activities that we do with our youth. So there's the media does not have my mind is like a 1 hour long activity that we'll do with young people where we look at different commercials for processed food, right? And also look at statistics that show the ways that corporations target ads to African American communities in order to get them addicted to those particular foods, which of course, leads to a whole number of health problems. So we do some media analysis like inside projector, and then we have them make their own commercials for something that they grew on the farm that day that they like. So like whether it's tomato or carrot, and they end up making these skits that are hilarious. I'll send you some videos of them, about foods that actually are life affirming. So again, kind of soft entry, but by the time they're finishing with our program, they're like protesting on the steps of the Capitol for abolition, but there's a lot of ways to, to get to help young people to see the ways that, that government or corporations or these interests are really not looking out for them. They're trying to get profits out of them, but they're not looking out for them. And to help start to analyze and disentangle the messages that they're getting from the media from what's actually important to them in their community.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
And then we can go to Barbara. I think Barbara had her hand raised.
Yes, and my question just was you answered my question because I was going to ask you, by the way, thank you very much. Your message is inspiring. And that is that we have a public health issue with respect to corporations and processed foods and being linked certainly to poor health. And so I was going to ask if for those of us who cannot turn to farming or perhaps live in a very urban environment, is the beyond protest, or even how can we protest? Perhaps some of the things you've just described are maybe actions we can take to try to prevent the continuing food desert widely that's coming because of the way corporations produce processed foods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that can be done societally and individually. You know, the Farm Bill is up for renewal. It's the piece of legislation that controls the entire food system, and a lot of folks never heard of it. So getting up to speed on what's going on with the Farm Bill and reaching out to your elected representatives and letting them know that you care about these issues around access to food and access to nourishing, life-giving food for all communities, and that you're watching how they vote on the Farm Bill, you know, is one way to advocate. And we have like toolkits and stuff that I could also send. Anyone who's interested can email me. I can send you like a Farm Bill advocacy toolkit. But on an individual level, I'll tell you this story. The first time I went to Haiti with my sister Naima, right after the 2010 earthquake, we were going to do some solidarity work there. And we're staying in a room together, and Naima pulls out this jar of mung bean seeds and proceeds to like rinse it with and put a little cloth over it. I was like, what are you doing? She said, I have to have my garden with me everywhere I go. So she was making sprouts in a jar. But it reminds me that a garden can be very small. You know, whether you're just sprouting or doing microgreens in your windowsill, or you have some herbs on your stoop, there are lots of ways for even urban dwellers or people who can't get outside to grow a little bit of their own food. And I think that that act of growing our own food builds connection with the natural world. It's empowering, it's inspiring, and most people get addicted and then they want to do more and more and more and more. So
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see a question in the chat about how many acres do you farm?
Sure. So we have 80 acres. We farm about 7 of those acres. We have orchards, herbs, vegetables, and fruits, the animals, the mushrooms, the bees. So, you know, it's about 7 acres that we're actively managing. And then do we use machinery or human labor? It is human labor intensive, but we'll use machinery for, you know, moving heavy things or forming up the beds, but it's mostly hand scale on the farm. Yeah, thanks for your question.
And Leah, I think you had seen another hand raised, which I didn't see, but maybe you remember who that was. Or whoever it was, please blurt out. Is there another hand raised?
I think Robin has another.
Robin has her hand up.
Robin, yes. Whoops, you're on mute still.
Animals. What part do the animals play? You know, I know that you've got all the vegetables growing and what. So I saw goats there, and you have chickens, I'm sure. I saw eggs. You know, so what part can you talk about the animals? Can you tell us?
Oh, I love this. So it's such a beautiful integrated system, and it's something I put a lot of thought into. So let me see if I can help you visualize this. So in the East Fields, which is across the stream, there's a 4-acre, what's called silvo pasture. Silvo means trees. Pasture is the grass and forbs that animals eat. So we have these rows of apple trees that are planted 40 feet between the rows, which is pretty wide spacing. But the reason that there's 40 feet between is that gives enough space to rotate the animals through with their portable electric fence. So we have 7 like pastures between the rows. So in the first one, we put the goats, right? The goats go first. And the reason the goats go first is because they like to eat grass. They like to eat clover. So they're basically lawn mowing the whole pasture, but then they also poop. And all of that manure becomes fertilizer for the tree orchard. So the apple trees, and there's elderberries and currants and herbs and all of this. So they're fertilizing that. Then once they've eaten that grass down, they move to the pasture number 2. Now the chickens come in where the goats just were. And the chickens pick through the goat poop and eat the parasites, which keeps the goats healthy. They add more fertilizer. They give us eggs. And they enjoy short grass. Chickens will actually get sick if you put them on tall grass because it'll impact their crop. So it goes, the goats move to the next one, then the chickens follow, then the goats, then the chickens, and the goats, and the chickens. Meanwhile, they're fertilizing the whole field. And by the time they've eaten the 7th pasture, the first one has grown back tall again, and they rinse and repeat. So it's a wonderful, in Project Drawdown, they rank silvopasture in the top 10 ways to heal the climate because it's so good at capturing carbon. When you have trees and pasture together, you have a large underground biomass in the form of the roots that's capturing carbon. So that entire pasture is, you don't have to bring any inputs in. It's totally self-sustainable, between the goats and chickens fertilizing the trees and enjoying the shade of the trees. And then, the people get the meat and the eggs and the
That's the
apples and
part.
all of that.
So everyone's not vegetarian. So you're also eating the animals too as well.
Some people are vegetarian, but some people are not vegetarian.
So some people are eating the goat, and you don't have,
Yeah.
like what meats do you have in your that
Just
are
goats and chickens.
Goats
We
and
don't have, our soils are still very fragile. So the larger animals, they would destroy our soils. We only have the light animals.
Yeah.
And then the question of how long do they remain on each pasture, it works out to about 2 weeks per rotation. So every other Friday we move the fences, you set up the new fence, then you encourage the goat to the new fence, you take it down. It's fun. We've got it down to about 1 hour and 10 minutes for the full rotation. Yeah.
One thing that was fascinating about your book is that it's a real guide for the backyard farmer. You could step-by-step information on what to do. And I think that talks to Robin also. So would you tell us the music story of Rocky Balboa and Apollo Creed?
I'd have to remember who won the fight. Okay, so you named, who won it? Was it Rocky won it?
It was Apollo Creed.
Apollo Creed won it. Okay. So let me see if I can remember. This is now like a long time ago, but we name all of our roosters after like pro wrestlers. And our roosters, they end up in the soup pot every couple years. So this is now a while ago, but we actually had one of the roosters, quite literally, we were like praying. We had a really mean rooster. I think Rocky was the really mean rooster, right? And he was like attacking everybody. So you would go to get the eggs and he would like sneak out from behind a wheel well and peck at you and scratch at you to the point where none of my staff was willing to go get eggs. So of course I made my child do it. Emmett would go out there with like a full protective gear. He'd have like a snowsuit and like a helmet. he'd be having a trash can lid as a shield and a stick, and we were like, all right, we really need to do something about this rooster. And we were starting to jokingly pray, like if God would just give us a new rooster, that'd be so great. And one day a rooster literally came out of the forest. Now, mind you, we live in the woods. There's no neighbors. There's no farms nearby, nothing. And this rooster just comes out of the woods. And we did call the people in town, no one to see this rooster. And he came in and Apollo Creed beat up Rocky Balboa to like a bloody pulp, kicked him out, took over all the girlfriends, and lasted here for several years. So lots of antics. I think he's soup now too, because eventually, they all become soup, but we enjoyed him while he was here.
Great story.
Thanks for reminding me of that, Aunt Claudia. I was like, oh, yeah, that was fun.
And that question about how long they remained on the pasture from Ellie Costa, I think, is one of the leaders of our nonprofit here called Falmouth Farming Falmouth. So Ellie, this has been a very interesting thing for you, where you folks are starting to work that farm and make it a community farm. If Ellie's still on the call here.
Absolutely. Very meaningful. I'm soaking it all up. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on your farm. I would love to hear more about it at some point.
Well, we're actually working on the purchase of a farm, but we do a lot of other things. We have community gardens here in town. In fact, I was late to this because I was at a meeting about establishing a new community garden in conjunction with unaffordable housing. development. The developer wants everybody to have a plot where they can grow their own food. So that's just one of many, but I don't want to take any attention away from you. I want to listen.
Oh, that's
Thank you.
fantastic. Well, you're making me realize I neglected to mention in telling the story of Soulfire that we do have a community gardens program also. So we have a program called Soulfire in the City that came out of our members who are receiving the food being interested in gardening. And so we started a program where we build gardens in their backyards for them, for those who have yards. So we build the raised bed, we fill it with soil, we bring the seedlings, we have gardener gatherings. But from there, we started getting calls from, places of worship and schools. And so we've in addition to the backyard gardens, have established several, shared community gardens, including my favorite one. This is such a poetic justice. So remember I mentioned that we lived in the south end of Albany, which had no supermarkets or farmer markets or anything like that. And these were the neighbors who encouraged us to farm. Well, fast forward until last year, these very same neighbors took over the McDonald's, which was the only place you could get food on the corner. They bought the building and they turned it into this Black-owned community grocery store that we now provide food for. And we also help them to build a community garden outside the grocery store so people can come and garden. It's called the South End Grocery. Troy Jackson founded it, and it's just such a beautiful testament to this community taking control of their neighborhood and their health, and choosing what they want to have there.
Yeah, that sounds like real justice.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, thank
good
you.
work.
Yeah.
Well, Leah, you're making a difference in so many ways. And we certainly want to pass along. I can't wait to get your new book, Black Earth Wisdom. And I know people will want to follow up with you and look at your website, has a lot of information. And are there other questions from people? Questions while we have Leah here, looking around at the faces. So good. You can research more about Leah on her website. Leah, do you want to give us more?
Yeah, go ahead and drop in, and I'll just give you some closing, how to stay in touch. But I'm going to put soulfirefarm.org, and we would love to have visitors. So every month we have a tour, which is open to the public. And then every 2 weeks we have a community volunteer day, which is open to the public. So if you go to soulfirefarm.org and select the programs page, you'll see a calendar of events that you can register for. And we have, we also have online events. I know we're a bit far away from you all. I think about 4 hours from the Cape, if you include the bridge time, which is variable. But of course, if you're in upstate New York, we'd love to see you. So try to time it when we have a program. And also on the soulfirefarm.org website, there's a number of places to get involved in creating change. So we have an action guide for steps you can take to create a more just food system, including legislation that we're working on. There's something called the reparations map on the website, which has a list of Black and Brown led food and land projects all over the country. And you can see which ones are near you and donate or volunteer or otherwise offer support. So organizations that have some overlap with the way Soulfire Farm does things. And of course, we encourage you, as you're doing in your own community, to support your local community gardens and food justice work, and especially paying attention to the leadership of Indigenous and Black communities. So just want to say, you can buy the book from soulfirefarm.org, or you can buy it anywhere fine books are sold. It's probably in your local bookstore. It's on Amazon. It's all the places.
We have one last question.
Yeah. So there are 15 people on our staff, half of whom are here in person and half who work in various states and do our national work. And we have volunteer days twice a month where the public can come, and volunteers are certainly very helpful, and we appreciate you. And also it's a paid staff that holds it down in the day-to-day. Yeah.
Great. Lots of thanks. And
thanks everyone.
Appreciate your being here so much. And this has been a great session. So thank you, Leah. Thank you all for coming, and we'll be in touch. Take care, everyone.
Bye, Leah.
Bye-bye.
Have a great evening.
Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.